Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Schultz, and I have the privilege of serving on the leadership team here at the Hudson Business Lounge as the steward of member experience. And I extend a really warm welcome to all of you from the Hudson staff behind the bar in the cafe. And if you're in here during the week, we welcome you as guests. And with our partnership with Google Startup Grind here at the Hudson, we've really realized that we're part of an ecosystem, and that involves bringing in people from corporate, bringing in entrepreneurs, and really coming around the startup community here in Milwaukee in an effort to raise the awareness of startups and help Milwaukee become a top 10 tech hub in the next 10 years. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to my colleague, Sanjay Mohan, who is a startup co-founder himself, or I should say founder, co-founder, same thing, who will be then introducing our featured speaker, sorry, I'm tired, Troy Vosseller of Gener8tor. So, Sanjay.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, thank you to Hudson and Reinhardt for making this possible. And Happy New Year to everyone. Hope you guys had a great holiday and are looking forward to 2017, fully inspired and motivated to get this going. Before we start, quick announcement from Startup Grind headquarters. We just announced this morning a global membership of more than 1 million entrepreneurs as part of Startup Grind. So that's just phenomenal. Milwaukee just started 6 months ago, so we are still fledgling. We on our meetup, I think there are about 220 odd people who have signed up. But happy to be part of a huge global community which is coming together and trying to inspire and motivate people to launch their own entrepreneurial ventures. We have an exciting speaker tonight. Troy is the co-founder of Gener8tor. Please, a round of applause. A top 15 accelerator in the country. Troy has been an entrepreneur himself prior to co-founding Gener8tor. So we'll talk to him a little bit about his journey, just like we have in all our events. A little bit about himself, his startup, what his experience there was. Go from there into Gener8tor. Understand Gener8tor a lot more. I'm sure you would love to know the functioning, how to participate, what they're looking for, and so on. But like Nick said, the last part of this conversation is of utmost importance to us, which is based on what he's seeing in the startup world across the country and maybe even globally, because I hear from him just prior to this conversation that for their latest round they had about 20% applicants, international applicants into Gener8tor. So based on what they're seeing globally, what is it that we in Milwaukee need to do differently to make Milwaukee a much more vibrant startup community and a top 10 tech hub in the next 10 years. So with that, once more, Troy from Gener8tor. Thank you for coming in.
Pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Welcome and thanks for coming in. Let's start with your journey from, I believe, Scotty was the entrepreneurial venture.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit more about Scotty.
Sure. So I came into my role at Gener8tor created my own small business. So I started probably the most cliche startup that any college student can imagine, which is a t-shirt company, right? What every dorm kid thinks about or aspires to do is make a little money on the side selling t-shirts out of their dorm room, and that's exactly what I did. So I am originally from Brown Deer, Wisconsin, just north of Milwaukee, and went to UW-Madison, and my freshman year moved into the dorms, became friends with someone else who by happenstance randomly lived on my dorm floor. We quickly became friends and realized that we both wanted to start a company. We both kind of had that entrepreneurial bug. but we had no idea what that was going to be. And so, as is typical of most entrepreneurs, they innovate around what they know, and that was a fairly limited scope of view for us as freshmen in college. So our ideas ranged everything from an online dating service exclusively for UW students, and this is even pre-Facebook, much less pre-Tinder, Match.com, etc., all the way up to a service that would fill up gasoline containers at gas stations off campus, and then bring that gas back to people who own mopeds and scooters so that you wouldn't have to drive off campus. But we never did either of those or any of those things. We didn't want to smell like gasoline all day. We didn't want to play campus matchmaker. And so that being said, we always heard the word Scani used around campus. And for those of you that maybe haven't heard the word before or not as familiar with it, you can think of Scani as synonymous with cheesehead or Wisconsinite. Someone from Wisconsin, anything Wisconsin-esque. And so, as we heard that, we said, there's really this vein of state pride that I think is rather unique to Wisconsin. Meaning, if you look at other places in the country, with a few exceptions, maybe Texas and California being two of them, there's really not a lot of state pride. There might be city pride. So, for instance, there's very much Chicago pride. People will fly the W or don the city of Chicago flag, but those people don't have Illinois pride, right? And in fact, someone living in Springfield has very little in common with someone living in Chicago, right? Whereas I think here in Wisconsin, we very much have state pride, which is something that I think is somewhat unique and that we want to play off of. So how do we tap the success and the phenomenon, which really was the cheesehead, and how could we make that in something that's a little more fashion forward than wearing a foam block of cheese on your head? And as a side note, what's interesting is there's actually no cheese that's orange in color and has holes in it. So the cheesehead itself is even a made-up phenomenon, right? To take advantage of kind of the stereotypes to the nth degree. And so we had heard the word Scani used around campus, and we said, well, why don't we create a brand around that? And that really snowballed into Scani Nation, this movement to take pride in the state of Wisconsin. And so Ben and I each put in $300, so we started with $600 from our own savings. We printed 100 t-shirts that just said Scani across the chest and Scani Nation, and we literally started selling those t-shirts out of our dorm room. And we sold out in about a week, and at that point realized that we were onto something. And so really from that point forward, we would constantly reinvest those profits back into the business, adding more styles, more designs, more slogans, things of that nature, and the economies of scale kicked in as well. So what started as literally selling t-shirts out of our dorm room eventually expanded into us selling to third-party retailers like the UW bookstore, Bucky's Locker Room, Name of the Game, stores like that, if you've been to Madison on a game day. And then in 2007, partnering with our screen printer, Underground Printing, and opening our own storefront on State Street at 521 State Street, which we currently have today. So I continue to own that. That's still my baby, if you will, my first and company, and remains a brand that I own. But today I license the trademark and the brand and so forth to our screen printer, who then they manage the storefront that we have. They manage all the employees. They own title to all the inventory, and that's a license in exchange for a royalty type of arrangement. So I get to do all the fun stuff still, like coming up with new slogans and designs, and especially with the Packers doing well, we're having a lot of fun with a Run the Table shirt, if you guys want. We have one of those. So I get to do all the fun stuff, but then that really though was the tip of the iceberg for me getting involved in further entrepreneurial activity. So I view my path as very much an entrepreneurial career path. Meaning I never knew that today I'd be working in venture capital and working with high-tech startups in something that started as low-tech as screen printed T-shirts.
So I did take a look at the website this morning. I hadn't been there honestly before that. My favorite shirt was an upside down printed shirt that said keg stand, right? So that's
exactly.
But somewhere there I also saw a mention of Scani beer.
Yeah.
Tell us more about Scani beer.
Sure. So we built this brand starting in 2004 with Scani Nation. We opened our storefront in Madison in 2007, and about the same time we started in 2004, there was another group of entrepreneurs in Clear Lake, Wisconsin, on the western end of the state, who started a microbrewery called William Cuther Brewing Company, and their brand was Scani Ales. And so they had a microbeer. That being said, we operated in different spheres. So for trademark purposes, while they were in beer, we were in t-shirts, there really was no nexus, if you will, overlapping each other, but we were aware of each other nevertheless. And so eventually they went out of business, unfortunately. They ended up selling all their equipment, so all their brew kettles and so forth. And basically the last remaining asset they had was this federally registered trademark in the product service category of beer. And so, that became a pet project of my dad and I, and saying, how can we get a beer off the ground? And and thinking about how this was something that was very much in the brand of Scani, and was something that I think most entrepreneurs would say, starting a beer brand would be pretty fun. And so we did our research. We would contact different breweries around whether they had excess capacity for us to brew the beer and so forth. Eventually partnering with a distributor, General Beer, General Beverage out of Madison, as well as a brewery that they had an alternating proprietorship with, and launched that beer in 2012, and went off to a great start. We sold 1,000 barrels in our first year, which is pretty significant for people who know beer. And so went through that first 1,000 barrels. That being said, and I think this is a good lesson, we ended up pulling the plug on that after about a year in 2013. So we weren't happy with the quality, the consistency of the beer, and a lot of that has to do with us, I think having underestimated the complexity of some of the aspects of the beer business, as well as the competitive landscape in terms of what does it take to beat Miller Coors and InBev to get a tap line at a major bar, or how do you get distribution in major grocery stores like Roundy's, Pick and Save, Woodman's, etc. And so we ended up pulling the plug on that and went back to the drawing board and just kind of put it on ice. However, we are excited that we are going to be relaunching that with a new brewery partner. So we haven't gone public with anything yet, but we have a really great brewery here in Wisconsin that we're excited to be working with to relaunch that product in a couple different varieties. So that should be happening here in 2017.
2017?
Yeah.
This is the first time people are hearing about it?
I think so. Yeah.
All right.
We haven't tweeted about it or anything.
So before we talk about Gener8tor, talk to us about the shift from being an entrepreneur yourself to actually helping other entrepreneurs, evaluating the startup community.
Certainly. So for me, my path was starting the t-shirt company in my dorm, and then graduating. At that point, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, right? So you watch enough SVU and you think that's what you want to do. And so I went to law school. I was fortunate to get accepted to the University of Wisconsin Law School. And about halfway through my first year, I realized that it just wasn't something that I liked. It wasn't what I expected. The competitive culture of it was just kind of slightly toxic amongst the student body. And so I looked into getting an MBA simultaneous with that. And at the time, the University of Wisconsin had an MBA specialization specifically in entrepreneurial management, and so that was something that really caught my eye. So I had the applied experience with Scani Nation on the t-shirt and beer side, but I never majored in business. I didn't take any business classes in undergrad, and so I thought this was an opportunity to get some of the formal academic training in that realm. And so I was accepted into the business school. They then offered a dual degree, a joint degree, a JD MBA that I completed then in Wisconsin. And then upon graduating, I was employed by the law school. So the law school spun up a program very similar to the program that Marquette University launched here not so long ago called the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic. So this was a clinical program at the University of Wisconsin Law School where upper level law students could take this 4-credit curriculum and provide free legal services to startups, entrepreneurs, and small businesses. So it was meant to be free legal services for those entrepreneurs, but a real hands-on training experience for the law students themselves who wanted to go into that practice area. So I was hired as a supervising attorney, a clinical professor, to work in that program. And a lot of the clients that my students were working with were entrepreneurs coming out of college. They were undergrads, they were grad students, or other people in the community just getting off the ground. And that was an experience I really loved because not only was I having an opportunity to mentor and work with law students, but I had, vis-a-vis those law students, I got to work with all those entrepreneurs. So in many respects, I felt like being a founder again. I got to work with, between 5 to 10 clients at a time that were under the purview of my students. So really seeing a very diverse set of people, everything from people making, handcrafted birdhouses to the latest biotech and medical devices.
Wow, terrific. So we've had a series of startup grind speakers, and quite a few of them entrepreneurs themselves, and everybody talks about two major challenges, right? It's capital and it's resources, and you're providing both. And you just told me that 628 applicants in the last round?
685.
685. So talk us through how this process works with
Sure. So, to kind of bridge the gap there. So I was working as this supervising attorney at the law school's Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic. That's actually how I got to meet my co-founder, Joe Kurgis. So many of you guys know Joe's name, who lives here in Milwaukee. Joe was also a member of the 94 Labs group. So 94 Labs was really the first accelerator here in Milwaukee, the first accelerator in Wisconsin really of its kind. And so while I was a supervising attorney, some of my students represented 94 Labs startups. And so that's actually how Joe and I got to meet each other. Joe also has a law background. He was an attorney at Quarles and Brady as well. And so that's how Joe and I got to meet. And we both had this shared perspective from the ground perspective that there lacked a lot of efficiency for an entrepreneur to go from idea to incorporation to growth to raising venture capital, and we thought we could make that much more efficient. And so we had long been admirers of the accelerator model, starting with guys like Paul Graham, who started Y Combinator out of the Boston area, Brad Feld and David Cohen, who started Techstars in Boulder, Colorado, and said, we think we could do this here in our own backyard. So 94 Labs had shut down at that point. Gener8tor then started up in the summer of 2012, and that's really when Joe and I and the rest of the team got it off the ground. So what Gener8tor is we're a mentorship-driven startup accelerator. So at our core, we are a privately funded venture fund. So we go out, we're now in our 4th fund. We raise money from limited partners. These are either high net worth individuals or institutions ranging from the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation to Madison Gas and Electric, the utility company in Dane County, who then invest into our fund. From that fund, we cover not only the operating expenses and overhead of Gener8tor, but then we also use the capital to make investments, cash investments into the companies that we select to go through our program. So we invest capital, so we invest cash into those companies in exchange for a small piece of equity, and then we work with those companies. They physically relocate to either our Madison or Milwaukee office, and we spend 12 weeks with them, during which time we're connecting them with mentors, potential customers, our corporate partners, as well as potential investors, all focused on growth. How can we help this startup grow through introductions, through our own expertise, through the community that we formed amongst mentors and peer entrepreneurs and alumni of the Gener8tor program, with the theory that if a company continues to grow consistently month over month, then that company will naturally have an easier time raising follow-on capital to continue to fuel that growth. And so we've been doing it now for 4 years. We've completed 9 cohorts between Madison and Milwaukee, and we just expanded into Minneapolis as well. We've invested in 49 companies, and combined those 49 companies have gone on to raise more than $100 million in follow-on funding. Just like colleges and universities are ranked, as you mentioned, so are Startup Accelerator. So each year, a group of professors out of Rice University and MIT, they do what we call a data colonoscopy. So we have to disclose every piece of data we have in terms of number of applicants, acceptance rate, every financing round that every one of our startups goes through, any liquidity events or exits, acquisitions that our companies go through, any failures or companies that have gone out of business. And then that quantitative data is combined with qualitative data, basically net promoter score surveys from our alumni, from our founders, as well as amongst venture capitalists from throughout the country. And so based on those results, we've been fortunate, as you mentioned, to be ranked amongst the top 15 programs in the country for the past 2 years running. So, thank you. I should also point out that whether you consider us Madison-based or Milwaukee-based, we consider ourselves very ambidextrous in that regard. I live in Madison, Joe lives in Milwaukee. Our team is equally split between the 2 cities. We have offices in both year-round. But whether you consider Madison or Milwaukee, we're still the smallest city by far in that top 15 ranking. And so that's another thing that we're really proud of, to be able to punch above our weight class on a relative basis, if you will.
You preempted my question there, so we'll skip that one. So. Let's talk about success. What does success look like for Gener8tor?
Yeah, so what does success look like for us? So at the end of the day, we are a for-profit venture fund. So it's incumbent on us to get a positive ROI for our investors. So we have a fiduciary duty to make the best investment decisions that we think we can make, invest in the best opportunities, the best entrepreneurs, and then give it our all and really bust our asses to help those companies and really make it go of it. Peeling that back one layer beyond, at the end of the day, we are in the business of customer service, and our customers are the entrepreneurs that we invest in. So at the end of the day, we're going to be pounding on the table and backing those entrepreneurs no matter what they're going through and taking their position on their side, while at the same time, trying to mentor them. But at the end of the day, I think it's very foundational to what we do that we're always on the side of the entrepreneur. So we never take a board seat. We don't have any sort of extra contractual right or control over any of the companies that we invest in. And so that really gives us the freedom to advocate for them as entrepreneurs. So if there's ever a situation where a board member or someone was going sideways or adversarial with the entrepreneur who's also on the board, we have a very clean position and always taking the side of the entrepreneur. And so for us, success is, did we do our job? And if we ask entrepreneurs that have gone through our program, would they do it again? Because again, they're in the best, having gone through it, having taken our deal, having gone through the experience, they're really in the best position to determine if it was worth it. Was it worth it? And so for us, we always want that question to be a resounding yes, absolutely. I'm so happy I did it. And so that's another thing that we look at.
So other than the top 15 qualification, how has it been doing in terms of ROI for your in business?
Good. So we, like I mentioned, we've made 49 investments. Combined, those companies have gone on to raise more than $100 million. They're generating somewhere, cumulatively, remember, they're generating somewhere north of $30 million in annual revenue and have created more than 400 jobs, many of which are here in Wisconsin. So we're really proud of all those statistics. Of those 49 companies, 4 have gone on to be acquired for nothing, no home runs yet, but nevertheless, in most instances, getting our money back and then some, in terms of those exits. So we're happy with those outcomes. And then 4 of those 49 companies have gone out of business. So we feel very good about our survival rate as well. So, you can hear or look up all different statistics around small businesses and startups in terms of the failure rate. So we feel very good about having only 4 of those companies out of 49 having gone out of business to date. That being said, one of the hardest things I think for us as accelerator managing directors, but also for any investor and for any entrepreneur, is the reality that we know more of those companies will fail, and we never know which ones those will be. And that being said, we form such a tight bond with those companies, especially when they go through that 3-month program, bonding with us, bonding with each other amongst their cohort, within their cohort, and it's you never want to see that. That being said, I think what we can look forward to in the face of failure is that many of those entrepreneurs who are talented business people, developers, marketers, etc., they will go on and join other generator companies or other startups within the community. And so that's really about that safety net that I think we're continuing to build here in Milwaukee. So to the extent we want to make the analogy that entrepreneurship is like walking a tightrope, which I think is an accurate analogy, to the extent entrepreneurship is walking a tightrope, the more of a community, the more of an ecosystem we have, the stronger and wider and broader that safety net is. So that will not only encourage more people to want to walk the tightrope, which is something that we need here in Milwaukee, but it also means that talent will be recycled into other entrepreneurial ventures as well.
So just to get an idea of the pipeline, you said 49 you invested in.
Yeah.
What was the top of the funnel like at that point?
So in our very first program in the summer of 2012 here in Milwaukee, we had 90 applications. We ended up making 7 investments, so to give you a framework. Now in our most recent cohort, we had 638 applications and we selected 6 companies, and that took place here this fall in Milwaukee as well. Now we just closed our application window last night for our Madison 2017 program, and we had a record 683 applications. And we aim on average to invest in 5 companies per cohort. So we might slip up and do 6 again because it's always hard to make the final decision, but we're very focused on providing a concierge experience. So unlike a program, say Techstars, which may do 10 to 12 companies per cohort, much less Y Combinator doing upwards of 100 companies per batch, we've been very focused on this, averaging out around 5 companies per cohort, and then really giving those companies all of our attention and access to our network of mentors and customers and so forth.
So out of curiosity, do you keep track of those who didn't make your cohort and how they're doing?
Good question. Nothing formally, although we do keep an eye on it, especially companies that have gone through the interview process or that they were finalists, so they came very close to joining or being accepted into the program. We do keep an eye out, or when we hear about startups getting funding or financing, and certainly there's many companies that we've turned down that have gone on to be successful. They've raised financing rounds and raised money from VCs and continue to grow their businesses and whatnot, and that's great. We want to see that. We know that we're not infallible, and in fact we're not perfect at picking, especially when we're only selecting 5 companies. But we think we do a good job, and hopefully our team, based on the experience and pattern recognition that we start to pick up, hopefully we're not missing too many. And also I should point out we have yet to have one that's really burned us. So I'm sure it'll happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
So if you were to the reason I asked that question was I was wondering if there's a feedback loop from the market, so things that you're either declining or selecting, which tells you what are some of the things you may want to improve upon within the generator framework, right? Any such learning at all from either failures or successes?
I don't know. It's hard because every time we think we have identified a pattern be it this person's experience or their background or their pedigree or this type of market, and we think this industry is growing. Every time we think that we've mastered that pattern, there's always an outlier and there's an exception to that rule, whether it's positive or negative. And so we hesitate to ever have any sort of strict rubric on that. For us, it's ultimately about people. Do we think that the people behind this venture are formidable? So I encourage you guys to read Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator. He has a series of essays that he's written over the years. One of them is about it's titled How to Convince Investors. So if you Google Paul Graham, How to Convince Investors, or if you just Google Paul Graham formidable, he talks about what are investors looking for, and he really boils it down to this adjective: are you formidable? And he boils that down further to basically say, is this someone who gets their way in life? That's what he's looking for, and that's hard to pin down, right? It's hard to define what that is, but that's the intangible quality that he's looking for in that entrepreneur, and so we look for that in our applicants as well. So people and the entrepreneurs behind that company is what we're looking for. We're looking for complete teams, meaning if you're doing something in healthcare, we want to see people that have some level of healthcare domain expertise. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, meaning we think a lot of disruptions will happen from people on the outside looking in, but nevertheless, we think we need some baseline of competency around the industry or the vertical or the technology stack that you're improving upon in order to be successful. A good analogy to that is if you would never want to hire a law firm that outsources their legal work, just like we would never want to invest in a technology company that outsources their technology, right? We need that competency to be in-house and a complete team able to take it. That doesn't mean you're doing everything at 100%, but that does mean that within your founding team, you are sufficiently capable to bring a product to market and so forth, and focus on the most important aspects of that. And then lastly, we're looking for a large and growing market. So is this an industry that we think is growing and that is sufficiently large to justify a venture backable opportunity? And by that I mean there are plenty of businesses, often referred to as traditional small businesses, Main Street businesses, lifestyle businesses, that'll be very successful for entrepreneurs. So my t-shirt company is a great example of that, right? Gener8tor would never invest in Scotty Nation if it applied to Gener8tor. But nevertheless, it's profitable and I make money off of it, and it's a good product, right? So we're looking for things that ultimately can be very, very, very big in scale, but we also know that those outcomes are going to be very binary. So in many respects, we're looking for ceilings, nearly unlimited ceilings, but also unlimited floors. Meaning these are companies that can flame out to zero with the flick of a switch. But if everything lines up and they execute properly and a little luck thrown in there as well, they can be massive, massive successes. But we know that a power law exists. So, for 1 in 10 investments, are we going to have that big outcome? We know that that's kind of the distribution that we're going after, versus a lifestyle business, a traditional small business, where in many respects the floor is higher, because oftentimes you will be able, if you opened a new restaurant, coffee shop, t-shirt company, more traditional small business, that the chance of complete failure is actually probably less likely. You can always find some level of customers to keep your head above water. But at the same time, that ceiling is going to be lower as well, meaning there's less you can do in that size of business. So we're trying to exclude that. So we're looking for big venture backable, what we call a venture backable opportunity. And then after looking at all those things, we tip our hand to traction. So I'm willing to believe that any idea is good, but at the same time, ideas are pretty worthless. Or what I like to say is the best idea in the world is probably worth $20. And it really comes down to execution. Can the entrepreneurs, can the team behind this idea really execute and prove it in the marketplace? And so for us, that comes down to traction. The mantra we like to say to ourselves is, will the dog eat the dog food? Prove it to us. Don't just say, the dog will eat the dog food. Show us a dog eating the dog food, because we think customers who are users of the product, or better yet, customers who are paying for the product or for the service, are in the best position to determine whether what you're offering them has value. Because I can't guess that. As an investor, I will never be able to guess. I might have some hunches, right, and I can kind of fill in the gaps where there's missing data or missing information, but at the end of the day, prove to me that customers are willing to open the wallet and use your product and pay for it.
So that your statement around unlimited flow came as a bit of a surprise. Doesn't that contradict your ROE expectations that you might have on the fund?
No, because of how the power law operates, right? Meaning, if one opportunity is 100x return and everything else is zero, we've made money, right? And that's a distribution that, if you look historically at venture returns, that's the exponential curve that we see.
So
So let me expand on that. The fact that we have a high survival rate, I think is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I think it's good. On the other hand, it makes me worry of, are we not biting off enough risk?
Right.
That remains to be seen.
Yeah. So out of the 680 plus, how many from Milwaukee, Troy?
I'd have to tally them up. Out of the current applicant pool, I haven't gone through them yet. That's what I have to do tonight. So after I get out of here, I'm going to finish reviewing those applications. Anecdotally, I'd say historically, we don't run these numbers specifically, although this is making me think that we should, and maybe we will. If we do, I'll follow up and you can share it. But I'd say historically with these the last few classes, we've had, I'd say about 50 Wisconsin-based applications out of that applicant pool, 50. Out of 600 plus. Yeah.
And so, given your, and that seems like a low number. Do you agree? I mean, that's
we want it to be higher. We definitely want it to be higher because we do a lot of outbound recruiting. So literally, I flew in at 1 a.m. I got it back into Madison from a trip out to Los Angeles. So we do a lot of these recruiting trips in cities and regions where we've previously invested in a portfolio company. So now we have 2 companies in the Los Angeles area. So then I'll go out there and set up office hours. I'll basically post up in a coffee shop, send a cold email as many startups as I can find on F-Success and AngelList, and ask them to come meet me for 15 minutes to learn more about Gener8tor, and I want to learn more about them and their startup. We do this in cities ranging from Los Angeles to Chicago, Toronto, Boston, Miami, Indianapolis, Minneapolis. We went to Atlanta this year, Des Moines. So we try to go to cities where we previously invested or where we have a hunch that something's going on and we want to check it out. So that's kind of really the front end recruiting process. That being said, when we go out and do that, we're very happy to do that, and that's really part and parcel, I think, to our large applicant pools, which we think also have a high amount of quality in them as well. That being said, we're fishing in the same pond as all of our competitors. We are in a competitive slice of venture capital, the accelerator genre, if you will. And so we're competing with programs like Capital Innovators in St. Louis, Techstars in Chicago, the Brandery in Cincinnati. So we're competing with those programs, and we know that they're often fishing in the same pond as we are. And so in many respects, that becomes a race to the bottom, a zero-sum game, because we have to outcompete or out-negotiate or outsell those different accelerators. What we love to have is a proprietary amount of deal flow right here in our own backyard. And that's something that we're actively working on. We launched a program in 2015 called G-Beta. So you can think of that as Gener8tor Beta. It's a truncated version of Gener8tor. So it's a 6-week program instead of 12 weeks. And it's completely free to start up. So we take no equity, there's no fees, and it focuses on entrepreneurs within the local area. So we launched that program in partnership with American Family Insurance and the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, WARF, in Madison in 2015. And we run it 3 times a year with up to 5 companies in each of those 3 cohorts. And like I said, it's totally free. We then piloted it in Milwaukee this past summer, and we're hoping to continue to expand it to Milwaukee, but we're still looking for a partner or partners to partner with here in the region. So if there's anyone at any of the universities, whether it's Marquette, UWM, MSOE, or any local nonprofits or for-profit corporations for that matter, we'd love to find a sustaining partner here in Milwaukee. We also run that G-Beta program in Minneapolis, where we have partnered with the University of Minnesota and their Office of Technology Transfer, and we're also running one right now. We're going through the filter process in Beloit, where we have a sponsor in Hendricks Commercial Properties down there in Beloit and work out of the Ironworks Iron Tech development down there.
So how was the response last summer to G-Beta?
It's been great. So we've now...
Milwaukee?
Oh, in Milwaukee, it was great. So we had 5 companies go through that program, a diverse mix of companies, everything from just local startups to companies out of Mount Mary, companies out of UWM, MSOE, and other locations. So we want to do more of that, meaning how can we help, based on our experience of having done this for the last 4 years, how can we help identify the entrepreneurial talent within these communities? How can we set them down an entrepreneurial path? And then how can we align their milestones with what a national venture capital scene would value? Because I think too often companies, they're just not out of the community, not out in the investment community at large, at the national scene enough to truly understand what those milestones and how those companies should be formed and where do they stack up against companies that they're competing with. Because at the end, I mean, entrepreneurship at its core is competition, right? And so it's not about you in a bubble. Is your company worthy of getting funding? It's, is your company better than the next alternative coming down the conveyor belt? And trust me, if I have a $10 million fund, a $100 million fund, a $1 billion fund, which many of these VCs are managing, there is a conveyor belt as long as you can imagine with perfectly wrapped startups coming down coming down the chain. So if you have a tear in your wrapping paper, they're just going to throw it away and take the next startup, and you need to be paying attention to that. So with G-Beta, we're trying to send more people down that path, and how can they merchandise their product, and how can we hold them accountable and set the appropriate milestones so that they can also aspire to raise that capital and continue to grow as a high growth startup. And so the goals or the outcomes that we're looking for with G-Beta are, can at least 1/3 of the companies that go through that G-Beta program go on to be accepted into other accelerators, that could be Gener8tor itself or any other accelerator throughout the country, or raise a seed round from angels or VCs. That's how we measure success.
So, obviously something prompted you to launch G-Beta. I'm going to try and focus this question primarily on Milwaukee. Gener8tor now has had applicants from all over the country, even internationally. You've gone out on your recruitment pitches nationally. What is it that you're seeing on a national level and when you compare that to what's going on in Milwaukee, right? What needs to change? Because one of the reasons why we are getting together on a regular basis is try and debate on what should we do differently to be able to have a more vibrant startup community, two, obviously have a better access to capital, and then obviously resources which are required for success.
So, good question. So I think we need to take a more worldly view and realize that we have the benefit that capital today more than ever is fluid, meaning it has no boundaries. Capital is not just local, meaning companies can go on AngelList and get funding from AngelList syndicates from all over the world, and these investors come from all over the world. So it's not geography has less and less to do with it. It's still important, but has less and less to do with it, meaning the majority of dollars that have gone into our startups have come from outside of Wisconsin, right? Meaning we take these companies as part of the Gener8tor experience on a roadshow. We schedule trips to San Francisco, we do full days in Chicago, Minneapolis, pitches throughout Wisconsin, and virtual pitches outside of that. And the logic is, if it takes 50 pitches to get one yes, then I'm glad we did 50 pitches and not 49. And I think too often local entrepreneurs think, well, I went to the 3 different sources of capital locally and they all said no, and therefore I'm going to give up and I'm going to write a mean editorial, right? That should not be the answer, right? Because those same people said no to all of our companies, and our company still went on and raised $100 million, right? So get off your butt, find a way to get in front of those people, be formidable, and it's a volume game. You need to pitch as much as possible. To get in front. And the most common answer you will hear that every entrepreneur has heard, Steve Jobs heard it, Dropbox heard it, Airbnb heard it, whether it's old startups of the past or current days, unicorns happening right now, they all heard no 1,000 times, right? And that's just the name of the game. It's a volume game. And I think not enough local entrepreneurs realize that you need to get out there and pitch your butt off as much and as broadly and as wide as possible in order to get the outcome that you're seeking. And so I think that's really important. That being said, so from a relative or comparative standpoint, we feel very good about Madison. Madison continues, we think, to punch above its weight class, especially on a relative or per capita basis. For instance, if you walk around the Capitol Square in Madison, you can go to every address on that square and point to a venture-backed startup. So that not only is there a quantity, but there's also a density, which is pretty tremendous in Madison. Milwaukee, less so. Unfortunately, we're not seeing enough new startup creation. We put a lot of that blame. Blame's too strong of a word. We think universities are probably at 1/5 of their commercialization potential. And that's not just traditional tech transfer that I'm talking about. That's everything from who's that next potential Mark Zuckerberg in the dorm room that now has an idea that's being spun out. We need more of that entrepreneurial culture. Some of that means we need more role models. So we need to be able to look and point to people here in the community that have started a company, that have raised venture capital, that have successfully exited, and I can say that woman did it, right? And so I want to be just like her. So we need more role models like that. We then need that wealth to be reinvested, both the financial wealth as well as the institutional knowledge, back into the community. So with role models, we get a double effect, if you will, a second order benefit, which is not only do we have role models, but now that wealth has been reinvested, or hopefully is reinvested back into the community. And that's really the virtuous cycle that we see places like Silicon Valley have, which gets to my next point, which is around non-compete agreements and a culture of non-compete within Wisconsin. So if we look at the state of California, where non-competes are judicially completely unenforceable. We see this virtuous cycle play out. And by that I mean an executive from Yahoo has a great idea, they quit their job at Yahoo, they start a company, their boss, maybe the CEO of Yahoo, acts as an angel investor, invests in that individual's company, and then Microsoft buys that company, and everyone's happy. No one's saying, hey, Yahoo really got a raw deal on that or whatnot. A rising tide raises all ships, and I think that's a philosophy, a mantra, an ethos that places that have been successful with startups like Silicon Valley have really embraced and have had a lot of success with. So the challenge as well as an opportunity that I see is I cannot name more than one startup in all of Wisconsin that's venture-backed, that was founded or has as CEO a former employee of any of Wisconsin's Fortune 500 companies. So nothing from JCI, nothing from Rockwell, nothing from any of these companies. And to me, that's bad, right? That's a challenge, but it's an opportunity, meaning if we can unleash this talent, and you have a background like this too, right? So if we can unleash this talent, how can we get it away from these corporate environments into the startup community, and how can we make those executives of those legacy companies believe that this is what matters? And I think we do have a role model in Madison. I think American Family Insurance, which is in the Fortune 400, they've really embraced this. They've created their own dedicated venture capital arm called American Family Ventures. They've been a sponsor and lead donor to the Starting Block Madison project, which is a new co-working and collaborative space going up in downtown Madison. So we would love to see more entities, specifically in Milwaukee, lead and take this position.
So my question was really about that. So it's about density, not the success ratio. I mean, we've heard from everyone, including yourself, that capital is not only fluid, it's abundant, right? So get off your butt, get going, and as long as you know how to get it done, you will be successful.
Yeah.
Question is density. Why aren't we seeing a lot more startups? So yeah, we would like to, and you portray that as a challenge. The question is how? How do we get to a point where we have a larger number of startup ventures coming out of the Milwaukee area?
So we'd love to play a role in that. So my self-interest pitch is we would love to be able to work with a Marquette or UWM, and we pitch to them to create a sustained G-Beta program here in Milwaukee. We think a program like that could continue to identify and pull out would-be entrepreneurs that ideally would otherwise not have pursued that path. So that's step number one. Step number two, we need to keep having programming like this. So I think things like Startup Grind, places like the Hudson, places like Ward 4, where people can really come together under one roof, I think are very important to the success of the ecosystem. And ultimately we need those role models, because otherwise we have, unfortunately, we have bad information, we have misinformation that pseudo mentors and wannabe investors are sprouting, and that's too bad. We need to stay away from that.
But at the same time, the Mark Zuckerbergs are far in between, right? So you can't necessarily just wait for the next Mark Zuckerberg to come out of Milwaukee. We need to find ways of encouraging the, whether it's college grads or whether it's experienced professionals in the industry, to get out and take the leap.
Definitely.
And like you said, walk the road, because the safety net is there. It's not that it's not there.
So if I had to give 3 concrete recommendations, it'd be let's take a look at non-compete legislation at the state level, and ideally let's eliminate non-competes. Interestingly, I'm a lawyer by trade. Non-competes, there are no non-competes for lawyers by state law. So interestingly, who writes the laws? It's lawyers, and they've decided that that's not part of their self-interest, so they're going to get rid of that law. But for everyone else, it seems to be okay. That doesn't make sense for me. So I think that's one thing that that hopefully is a collective interest, looking at that non-compete. The second thing is, I think creating a fund of funds, and I'm not talking about the Badger Fund of Funds, which the legislature enacted about 2 years ago, but rather if we look at communities similar in size to Milwaukee, like a Cincinnati, Ohio, for example, they created a group called Centrifuge, and I encourage you all to look it up. I think it's the gold standard in terms of how a community can take a city, regional, and statewide look at economic development. And so what they did there, it was private and led by private industry. The state did put some money in, however, I think it's very important to note that this is led by private industry. And what happened is they raised their first fund was $57 million. It was led by Procter & Gamble, with other corporates in the community playing a role, including the largest health system in Cincinnati, Kroger, and other large corporations within that community who privately put up that capital. The state then put up capital as well. That then created this organization called Centrifuge. They attracted national level funds to relocate. So, Techstars Ventures, Mercury Fund, a host of other kind of national top-tier venture funds who set up base there because that centrifuge organization became a limited partner. They became an investor in those funds. And so now Cincinnati got the benefit of all that because those funds weren't required to just invest in Cincinnati, which is really kind of how the Badger Fund of Funds was structured or has been structured, but rather they were saying, hey, come to Cincinnati, and we think a natural byproduct of you being here will be that you find deals here. Either you'll find deals here that you didn't know existed, or deals will be attracted here. There'll be some magnetism going to your density point that gets created. So that's my second point. Number one is let's take a hard look at non-compete and the enforceability of them. Secondly, I think we can aspire as a community, and this is really going to take the corporate community to get behind, but can we create a fund of funds that's corporate-led to then birth multiple venture funds or attract top-tier venture funds to the region? And then three, I'll go back to our pitch. We'd love to have a partner here for G-Beta in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that second point because every large corporate in the market, whether it be G, Northwestern Mutual, Harley, Coles, have an enterprise venture fund. And they're all running against their own objectives, trying to again fish out of the same pool. But if you could create a common fund of funds for the area, wouldn't that be great?
That'd be fantastic.
That would be fantastic. I'm going to open out to questions from the audience at this particular point in time. Mike?
Hey, Troy, I was at the last pitch event for Gener8tor, and obviously there's a huge audience there. And
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, there was a lot of celebration around companies that were considering staying in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
How do you think we as a community can help make that less of a deal, where everybody's like, yay, finally somebody's staying here, and more like, of course you're staying here.
Yeah. I guess my reaction is I think it's okay to celebrate it, right? Meaning we have to realize that there's life beyond Milwaukee and there's life beyond Wisconsin, right? And I think too often we look for these, like, this goes along your critique of it. We look too much to external validation. If I had a critique of Wisconsinites, it's that we crave external validation, right? And we almost can't take pride in what we already have going on. So I agree with you in that respect. That being said, we also need to be perfectly comfortable with a VC fund or an accelerator like Gener8tor who has a big success that's not located here, but nevertheless that company either lived here temporarily or for a 3-month period, or they come back here and they have fond memories. That's just as important. It's no different than if the Green Bay Packers could only recruit players from Green Bay, or I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, they can recruit players from anywhere in Wisconsin. We would not have won the NFC North, right? We'd be a terrible team. And so we need to think more broadly than that, because even though those players aren't from Wisconsin or they don't remain here in Wisconsin, there's still an attraction and a benefit that we get as a result of them having spent any amount of time here. So I think that's important. What we can do as a community to get more of that, and so therefore hopefully it becomes more routine and not extraordinary, I think is part of it is on the corporate side. So especially for B2B companies in particular, how can we find customers for them? At the end of the day, as much as startups want equity capital and venture debt to continue to grow their businesses, at the end of the day, what they want more than anything is revenue and customers. And so if we have great corporate firepower here in Milwaukee, so we can truly leverage that to our benefit. And in fact, one of the companies I'll point out is Lumanu, who from our last cohort, they came from San Francisco. They have now relocated permanently in Milwaukee. Their first customers were CUNA Mutual Group in Madison and Harley Davidson here in Milwaukee. And that really gave them, I think, the courage to want to stay here and say, hey, there's paying customers here. We want to be close to those customers because we're still learning and iterating on our product and improving it. And I think the more we can have examples like that, the better. And I'm not talking about charity, meaning I don't want Harley Davidson buying from a company or technology that they have no use in doing. I want them saying this is actually the best in breed and the best solution that we found to this very real problem that we have. And I want to see that happen at Northwestern Mutual and Rockwell and JCI and Miller Brewing and so forth. I want to see that happen in all of them. So we do have some great examples, Harley Davidson, Kohl's, and others in the region that have been customers of our companies and other companies in the community. We need to see more of that. We need to see tenfold of that. And I think oftentimes executives don't realize that if they were to devote, even just a small percentage of the amount of funding that they do from community branding, but repurposed it to procurement specifically around startups and ideally local startups, I think they would have a twofold benefit. One, they would have great solutions to real technology problems that they have within the enterprise. And two, we'd be creating wealth and jobs right here in our own backyard. And again, that goes back to the rising tide raises all ships point. So I think we need more of that. And I think corporations, especially for B2B or enterprise companies, play a very outsized role in that happening.
if I can counter argue very quickly to that point though, but while I agree it's important to think beyond Wisconsin, don't you think from a longer term perspective it's also important to figure out a way to increase the retention, because that eventually impacts both the quality and the quantity of workforce. I'm working with school districts, Troy here, where top 12 out of the top 15 kids leave the state and never come back.
Yep.
Right, and that eventually has an impact on both the startup community as well as the corporate workforce.
Correct. Every county outside of Dane County in the state of Wisconsin has an outflow of millennials. So net outflow, meaning millennials are leaving at a faster rate than they're being retained in those communities. That's a serious problem for a place like Milwaukee County, right? So how do we reverse that? I do think it's creating that more of a culture here, more of a safety net. So there are other, let's rip the Band-Aid. I'm calling cool opportunities. I think more people are interested in working for a startup than a traditional company now more than ever, and that'll only increase, I believe, especially as the friction between changing jobs continues to ease and so forth. But hopefully that snowballs, right? I mean, there's no magic wand that we can spray across and say this is going to happen. But we need more of that. But we've had, Blessing from Exit 7C was here. He moved his company from Washington, D.C. Tony from Lumanu moved his company from San Francisco. Richard from Brightsellers, who's headquartered now in Ward 4 and has 25 plus employees, came from Cambridge, right? And so they relocated to Wisconsin. So we've had a number of these success stories, and we hope to have a combination of more of those. And again, this is never a contingency of our deal, meaning we're never requiring a company to relocate to Wisconsin. But what we say is, while you're here, if you have a really good experience, and that could be because you had a great mentor relationship, a great customer, a foundational customer, or investment that you sourced here that behooves you to want to stay here, we think you should strongly consider it. But we never want the tail to wag the dog. And in fact, the more passive we can be about being indifferent to where the company is, I actually think we're going to get more that want to stay here. And we've seen some anecdotal success with that.
Absolutely.
The problem that you were talking about, the fund-to-fund, we have a fund-to-fund, but it's pretty much focused on Wisconsin-only companies, and they just...
It hasn't made any investments yet.
No, exactly. So help me understand, who is stopping the fund-to-fund from being effective? And how do we get over that?
So that was a state-led initiative, and I think that was a fundamental flaw in it. So I'm not opposed to it, meaning I'm anxious for that to get started and off the ground, and I wish that the Badger Fund of Funds had 3, 4, 5 funds already up and operating throughout the state and making investments, because I think that would help all of us, including Gener8tor companies. That being said, I think to be truly effective, it needs to be privately led. So how can we get for-profit?
Why is that? Why does it need to be privately led in order to be effective?
Because otherwise I think we get rules like you can only invest in Wisconsin companies, and furthermore we're going to define that really narrowly, and we're going to exclude life science companies for moral and religious reasons, and the list goes on and on and on. Whereas if it was privately led, we wouldn't have as many of those hurdles. Let me give you another example. Those fund managers then have an obligation, a statutory obligation, to publicly report all their investments, all their returns. These are something that if you go to a fund at Sequoia in California and say, hey, give me your balance sheet and your cap table of all your investments and all your portfolio returns, they're gonna flip you the bird, right? They're not gonna tell you that stuff. Nevertheless, they're the most successful funds out there. So that's yet another reason why I think it makes sense to be privately led.
So how do we fix that? I mean, if the state is...
We need a champion. So, American Family has, on their own fruition, created their own dedicated venture unit. Other companies throughout the state have or are in the process of creating their own dedicated venture units. I think that's step number one, because those are thematic, right? So they're still looking at things thematic to their business. I think the next step, the second order of that, is how do we then convince those executives, those CEOs, CFOs, chief investment officers, and otherwise, how can we convince them that there's actually a workforce development and a quality of life and a community, in addition to an ROI argument, to create this fund of funds here in Wisconsin that's privately led. And I think if you were to ask Procter & Gamble or Kroger, Cincinnati, hospitals and clinics, why they did it, I think they would give you similar answers.
Dan Walsh from Hudson need to get on the phone with Harley and GE and Northwest.
Absolutely. I'll start tomorrow morning. Why wait?
Why wait?
Right.
Exactly. Questions?
All right, Troy, Gary Lotto from Hudson. Let's follow up another one from Dan. So my question has to do with your comment on the Gener8tor program.
Yeah.
You're getting support for that locally, particularly from the universities. What are some of the obstacles that you see, that you've faced, that trying to get that program started?
So it's hard because our most likely ally are universities. So for one, universities are natural, established magnets of talent. They're seeing new crops of students at the undergraduate, graduate, even the faculty and staff level on an annual, if not rolling basis, constantly coming through their doors. And so we think that's a logical place to start because if once we have the talent, we think we have a much higher chance of forming that talent into a going concern, into a startup. I think the hurdles are schools that they lack the self-awareness to think that there's a problem, right? I'll be blunt about that. Yet I can't name, UWM Research Foundation's been around for 7 to 8 years now, and I think last year they did $40,000 or $45,000 of licensing income total, and it is literally on a pipe wrench. I kid you not. And this is a school that's aspiring to be a major research institution, right? That's what we read about all day long, right? Whether it's Chancellor Monet or predecessor, etc. So I think we lack accountability, right? So at the higher education level, specifically in Milwaukee, I think we lack accountability around that entrepreneurial thing. Furthermore, though, I don't think we have enough donor pressure, whereas in Madison, there's a lot of donor pressure on entrepreneurship, computer science, STEM, etc. How can we create more of that and so forth? I don't think that same level of donor pressure exists at the Milwaukee and Marquettes and MSOEs of the world, so I think that's a part of it as well. However, we are seeing a significant amount of legislative pressure, meaning these universities are either focusing too much on non-STEM majors or they're not having a high enough percentage of job placement coming out of some of these majors and whatnot. These are the common, critiques of that. But I think we need more accountability. So, some of those statistics that I rattled off, I don't think people think about that much. Meaning we have organizations with massive budgets who aren't even right side up from an economic standpoint, from a balance sheet or P&L standpoint. And I think that's somewhat a critique of the region. So if talk radio existed for economic development like it does for sports and politics, I think all these people would be fired.
So, follow-up question to that, Troy. If, particularly with respect to entrepreneurship within the Milwaukee schools, higher education, do they understand the importance of what that means to the community, do you think? Or is there still a disconnect?
I think they do. I think they do. I mean, or at least they do a good job of paying lip service to it.
Well, they pay lip service.
Yeah, so I think they do, but again, we're just not seeing enough of it. Meaning, I would crave over UWM and Marquette startups if they're just coming out in droves, and we're just not seeing enough of it. We just need more volume and velocity.
Are you seeing that in Madison?
No, to the contrary. I think we see, that was a fear that we had. So when we launched G-Beta, which was originally in Madison, our fear was that, okay, our first go-around, we had 40 applicants, we selected 5 companies, but that was the first time. So let's see, 4 months later, what was it going to look like? Well, we still had 40 applicants, and then 4 months later, we still had 40 brand new applicants, and it's really sustained itself. So we think that engine is running. It can always do better. It can always be better, but we'd love to get that engine going here in Milwaukee and Beloit and Minneapolis, where we're also doing these programs. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Impact Engine in Chicago?
Yeah.
Social entrepreneurship startup incubator, and I guess what's your sense of that scene, both naturally as well as perhaps in Wisconsin?
Around social entrepreneurship or Chicago?
Social entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So I think, so the question was about the Impact Engine. So Impact Engine started as an accelerator focused on social entrepreneurship within Wisconsin. It's actually recently evolved into being just more of a traditional seed fund, if you will, investing into social entrepreneurial endeavors and whatnot. Now that's not to say it's looking at nonprofits, rather it's looking at for-profit startups that have some sort of social mission. So that could be environmental, that could be workforce development, that could be serving underrepresented populations, that could be around disease cures, public health, etc. I think it's a great niche. So obviously these are things that aren't going away. We're always going to have disease and poverty and whatnot, or at least for the foreseeable future. So we need more solutions to those problems, and I think entrepreneurship is a great way to solve many of those problems. I think they have the benefit of being in a much more robust ecosystem, being Chicago. And so I think as the ecosystem matures, you see more specialization. And I think Impact Engine is a great example. It's really an outgrowth of the maturity that the Chicago ecosystem has, relative to what we have here in Wisconsin. So I think it makes sense from that perspective. Do I think that's something like missing here? I don't know. I worry that if we specialize too early in an ecosystem like Milwaukee, then I think we're at risk of spreading ourselves too thin. And the risk of that is that those programs, if they're capable of getting off their ground, either the people burn out or the sources of funding dry up because they weren't able to be successful. So I think, at least the approach that we've taken, which has been successful, is industry agnostic, business model agnostic, geographically agnostic. How can we, at the end of the day, find the very best startups to work with? Because I think even that's really difficult. And if we were to even slice that down, to 1/10 or 1/5, or even less of that purview, I think it just becomes that much more challenging. So I think as ecosystems mature, we can aspire to some more of that specialization. That being said, I never want to hold people back, because at the end of the day, it's about a passionate entrepreneur making it happen. I would be more rich than having not started Gener8tor, but investing a nickel for everyone said it was going to fail, or who said they were going to start another accelerator. So if I were to aggregate those two comments and collect nickels, I have made more money in that time. But that being said, people who are passionate, I think, have full reign to go out and pursue it. And that's the same thing that Joe and I did with Gener8tor. And if there was a demand for that, then it'll be successful. Yeah.
Is Milwaukee going to slip even further behind if the angels that exist in the area aren't replaced?
You can't fall out of a well, right?
Some of the very few angels that are here are.
Yeah. So I think we see this in Madison. We see this in a lot of communities where populations of angel investors, high net worth individuals, oftentimes entrepreneurs themselves, I think they're a little constrained. They're stretched thin, meaning they have a lot of bets on the table, and liquidity has not happened as fast as they anticipated. And so it becomes, for every incremental dollar that they want to continue to invest, I think it becomes more difficult for them. And so I think we have within Wisconsin, and even we see this beyond Wisconsin, there's a collective kind of, we're holding our breath for that liquidity event to happen. And so again, we want to have that wealth and institutional knowledge reinvested back into the community. So I think we're waiting for that. We ourselves are waiting. I mean, we have 40 plus companies that are out there, alive and growing and whatnot, and we're anxious for those companies to eventually have liquidity events as well, or exits as well. So I think angels are feeling that way. That being said, I would love to foster more new angels, right? So for every employee that makes $250K plus, and there's plenty of those throughout Milwaukee, how can we educate those people about angel investing? And how can, if we were to get 1,000 people to each invest $1,000 a year, that would significantly move the needle in terms of the total amount of capital available at the angel level. And I think that's an aspirational goal that it's not on that agenda that I pointed out, but I think it's something that if there were an individual or group of individuals that really wanted to focus on that, I think that would be a compelling thing. Meaning, let's find 1,000 people to each invest $1,000 a year, and this isn't, I almost said donate, invest $1,000 a year with a strong expectation that there will be a return. I think that would lead to good outcomes. So I'd love to see that happen, and I'd love for a group to get behind an effort like that. Yeah.
Thinking of the number of applicants that you've had specifically from Milwaukee and Madison, how it was so 50, you said, that's just crazy to me. I thought it would be way more than that. Yeah. Do you think, and you kind of pointed to this about education, do you think that in any way, shape, or form that our education here in the Midwest is somewhat different from other parts of the country that inhibits and doesn't foster creativity?
Yeah, maybe. So I think something we see at a national level, and I can cite the statistics here in Wisconsin, but something we see at the national level is there is more of a focus around computer science. That's the most blunt example I can give at the middle school, grade school, and especially the high school level. So how can we foster more computer science, more competent computer science here, specifically in Wisconsin? Wisconsin, I think we have 500 plus high schools. In 2015, only 80 of which offered the AP Computer Science course. So that's a big room to improve, right? So I would love to get that closer to 100% of Wisconsin high schools offering AP Computer Science, right? So I would love to see that happen. At the same time, I think we have a demographic problem. I mean, we talked about the brain drain issue. I think there's something like almost 8,000 open jobs in Wisconsin that require some sort of computational science capability, and yet all of Wisconsin's colleges and universities combined only output something less than 800 or less than 900 people with computer science degrees a year. So we're never going to close that gap at the pace that we're going. So another area that I haven't mentioned really is how can we dedicate more resources to computer science? I mentioned the high school level level with AP classes, and a lot of that is on how can we train teachers to then train the students in those disciplines at the high school level, and I think that's important. But some examples that we've seen successful are University of Texas system, who offers summer training programs for Texas high school teachers, so a practicum and a curriculum around AP computer science. So I think that's a program that we could emulate here in Milwaukee or Madison and throughout the state. And I think the second thing is, I think it's about time that computer science becomes it rises to the level of a college level or a school within a broader university. And so by that I mean, if we look at UW-Madison, we have the School of Business, which was one of the first 6 schools of business created in the country. It was at UW-Madison back in 1901. And eventually by 1944, it grew so popular and there was so much demand within industry, meaning that it was in demand for these graduates, that an act of the Wisconsin State Legislature made it its own school, and that today is the Wisconsin School of Business at UW-Madison. I think we're on the cusp and need to create something similar around computer science, meaning the School of Business at Wisconsin today has something like 14 unique majors: accounting, finance, marketing, entrepreneurship, on down the line. So we see that specialization, and yet we still only have computer science. Right? It's become much more specialized than that, just like business had become more specialized. And so we would love and we advocate for, whether it's an act of the legislature, the Board of Regents, to actually carve out at the UW system schools computer science, computer engineering maybe combined into their own unique school or college at that campus. And we think that would actually give it a lot of credibility within the marketplace. So that's maybe another suggestion.
And one other aspect, I don't know if you agree, could also be, going back to what you said earlier, recognizing the fact that building a more vibrant startup community, it's a long haul. It'll take a long time. You mentioned Techstars. Bradford talks about it in his book as well. But one of the things that you hit upon is the bridging the gap between the large corporates and the startup community, and perhaps large corporates and the educational institution as well, from a skill gap standpoint. We had GE here as part of Startup Grind a few weeks ago. We have Northwestern Mutual coming up next month. I think this is a conversation that needs to be had around whether it be fund of funds or whether it be some other ways of trying to figure out.
Just being customers, right?
They all have innovation challenges. Yeah. They all have innovation challenges which have to get addressed, and they don't have to get addressed from anywhere else in the market, but right here. The question is, can we find the resources to get it addressed? Through the startup community or through the college. Well,
for whatever your guests from future corporations in Milwaukee, I'd love for you to ask them, have you ever purchased from a startup in Wisconsin? That's a simple question, right? And let's go for ubiquity on a resounding yes.
Terrific. So let's continue this conversation. Oh, sorry.
One more.
Go ahead.
Sorry for the lack of terminologies here, but you mentioned that you're going to review tonight the applicants that have applied. So what are the criteria that you are looking into those?
Yeah, so I mentioned the team. We're ultimately investing in people. Are these people that we think are capable and competent to build this venture or have started to already? Is it a complete team? Do they have the core capabilities in-house to create this technology or this product or service that they're proposing? We're looking for large market sizes. Is this a venture-backable opportunity? Is it a large and growing market that they're selling into? And then traction. All things being equal, that mantra I mentioned, will the dog eat the dog food? Prove to me that you've gone from idea to actually having users and ideally paying users. So people in the best position to evaluate the value of your product or service who are saying yes.
So let's continue this conversation over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Troy is going to be with us, and I'm sure on a one-on-one conversation he'll be happy to provide you whatever guidance, inspiration, motivation that you need. At the end of the day, from what I'm hearing from you, is other than non-compete and that corporate, bridging corporate and startup divide, it's up to us. We have to be the change that we want to see.
Yeah.
Walk the tightrope, take the leap, and Gener8tor is there as one of the viable.
There's lots of people trying to help, so you're not alone in this endeavor, right? Things like Startup Grind and others. So.
Terrific. So on behalf of Hudson and Startup Grind Milwaukee and our community here, thank you very much.
Thank you.